The rooftop was supposed to be empty. That was the entire point. 3 in the morning, Paris Couture Week, every designer and editor unconscious behind their suite doors after the kind of summit day that dismantles even the most composed. I came up for silence and cold and the city burning below. For the hour before, I had to become the version of myself that walks into the Alara Group's boardroom and deserves the commission that would define either of our careers. I did not come for Ro Aldine. And yet there she was at the rail, back to me, Paris doing something I had no name for to the line of her shoulders. 7 years of rivalry. She turned. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to the Tuesday evening when the elevator doors opened at the Grand Hotel de l'Éclat, and I walked into the lobby and looked across the marble floor and saw her for the first time in 3 years and understood, in the specific way you understand things your body knows before your mind catches up, that the next 4 days were going to cost me something I had not yet calculated. The Alara Group Creative Summit was billed as an industry gathering. The invitation language was careful and intimate convening of the fashion world's most significant creative voices, with the formal announcement of the Maison Alara Commission to follow at week's end. Intimate meant 40 people. Significant meant everyone the industry had decided mattered in the last decade. The commission announcement was the thing everyone was actually there for, because the Alara Group had spent 18 months constructing the mythology around Maison Alara's launch, a new luxury house, fully funded, creative director mandate, covering everything from the debut collection to the brand identity to the first global campaign. Not a revived house, not a reimagined archive. Something that had never existed before, with the resources most creative directors spend an entire career negotiating toward. 2 names had been circulating in the industry press for 6 weeks, mine and Ro Aldine's. I had spent those 6 weeks telling myself that the coincidence was manageable. That 7 years was enough time to develop professional composure around another designer. That the particular history between Ro and me was the kind of thing professional adult women placed in its correct folder and moved past. I had delivered this argument to myself with considerable conviction and believed none of it. Nell had watched me pack for Paris from the doorway of my studio, with the expression she reserved for situations she found both predictable and unnecessary. Nell Basque had been my creative director for 4 years and my closest friend for 12, and she had the specific gift of watching me catastrophize without saying anything until the moment when not saying anything was itself a statement. "You packed 8 outfits," she said. "I'm going to a fashion event," I said. "The packing is appropriate. For 4 days. Context is everything in this industry. Ivy." Her voice did not change register. It never had to. "She is going to be in the same building for 4 consecutive days. She is going to be at the same dinner table and the same presentations, and, if Cécile Moret has the sense of humor I believe she has, probably the same panel. You need to decide how you are going to be in the same physical space as Ro Aldine before you get on the plane." I folded a silk jacket I probably did not need and did not look up. "I'm going to be professional," I said. "Excellent and focused. I'm going to present the strongest pitch of my career to the Alara committee and come home with the commission." Nell was quiet for a moment. "That's the plan for the work," she said. "I'm asking about the other part." I looked up. She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her eyes doing the thing they did when she already knew the answer and was waiting for me to arrive at it. "There is no other part," I said. "Okay," Nell said, in the tone that meant she disagreed and had elected to let it go. I had been managing the other part for 7 years. 7 years of managing it, I told myself, was functionally the same as not having it. The lobby of the Grand Hotel de l'Éclat was everything that hotel lobbies in Paris become when they have been built by people who understood that space is a language. High ceilings, original stone, cut flowers at the exact temperature that says something worth preserving is happening here. 40 people who would never be in the same room under ordinary circumstances were circulating between clusters with the practiced ease of an industry that runs on the performance of ease. I saw Ro Aldine immediately. She was at the far end of the room with an untouched glass of wine, speaking to someone from the Alara committee, wearing a suit in a color I did not have a clean word for, something between deep slate and water, precisely cut. A single button at the waist that answered every structural question the silhouette asked. Her hair was pinned at the nape. It was always pinned in professional settings. I had seen it down exactly twice, and both times had been accidents, and both times had been 7 years ago, when she was still my employer, and I was in the process of learning what it meant to be in the same room as her, without the room. Becoming the primary event. She had not seen me yet. I had approximately 4 seconds in which I was looking at her and she did not know it, and I used all 4 of them to complete an inventory I had been telling myself for 3 years I would not need to run. She was 35 now. She looked, to the specific and unwelcome precision of my observational memory, exactly like herself, jaw set, shoulders carrying the particular economy of someone who had decided a long time ago that rooms came to her rather than the other way around. The composure that was not tension. Tension had visible edges. This was something more controlled, the composure of someone who had, through practice and will, made stillness into her native register. Then someone touched her arm and she turned and she saw me. We were 50 feet apart. The lobby was full of people. She held my gaze for 1 full second, 1 count, 1 breath, and then returned to the conversation she had been in, as if the interruption had not occurred. My chest did something I chose not to name. "She's here," said Nell at my elbow, arriving with 2 glasses of wine and having already catalogued the room. "I noticed," I said. "She looks—" "Don't," I said. Nell handed me a glass. "I was going to say composed. That's what I didn't want you to say." The opening reception lasted 2 hours. I spoke to Cecile Moret, who was 60, and had the quiet authority of someone who had spent 3 decades deciding which creative visions were worth financing and which were interesting failures. She asked me 2 precise questions about the Solon Studios' direction, and the precision of the questions told me she had done her research in the specific way that meant she had an opinion already and was verifying it against the real thing. I spoke to Ara Brandt, a museum director from Copenhagen who had the clear eyes of someone who assessed work for a living and did not see the point of social softening. I spoke to a writer from Luster magazine named Sasha Wen, who had the particular quality of attention that made you feel simultaneously more interesting and more transparent than you actually wanted to be. She had the mild, alert expression of someone who was always writing something, even when there was no notebook in hand. I did not speak to Ro Aldine. This was not difficult, exactly. The room was large enough and the evening had enough structure. But I was aware of her in the peripheral way that certain kinds of awareness operate, the kind that does not require looking directly at the thing to know precisely where it is. Every room she moved through. Every time someone in her orbit laughed. The way she held a glass she wasn't drinking from. I turned toward whoever I was speaking to with focused deliberateness. The way you turn toward light when the thing behind you is brighter. Sasha Wen noticed. I saw her notice. She filed it without comment, which in my experience was more unnerving than the alternative. It was the elevator that finally removed the distance entirely. I had gone up to leave a folder in my room before the evening continued. The doors opened at the lobby level, and Ro Aldine was inside. She was looking at her phone. She looked up. We held each other's gaze across the narrow, complete space of a hotel elevator, and then I stepped in, because stepping in was the only option that did not require an explanation, and the doors closed behind me. The elevator was the size that hotels from a certain era built them, designed for an era when personal space was architectural rather than psychological, and so the space between Ro and me was approximately what I would call, in any other context, proximity, rather than the same room. She put her phone away. "Ivy," she said. She used my name the way she always had, precisely. Not warmly, not coldly, the specific pronunciation of someone for whom language is never decorative. "Ro," I said. The elevator began to move. "How long has it been?" she said. It arrived without a question mark, which was how she spoke, as though the information she needed would simply appear when it was ready. 3 years, I said. "The Textile Council Roundtable in Milan. You left before the dinner." A pause. The machinery hummed around us. I had a flight, she said. You had a car, I said. Nell saw it from the lobby. Something at the corner of her mouth, 1 millimeter of something that was not quite a smile, and was not quite amusement, and occupied a territory I had spent years trying to locate on a map I could not finish drawing. You've done exceptional work, she said. She said it the way she said everything, without inflection, without the softening that transforms assessment into compliment. An accurate statement, delivered as such. The Autumn Collection, the Archive series. Thank you, I said, because there is no other grammatically sound response when Ro Aldine tells you your work is exceptional in a hotel elevator in Paris. The Alara Commission is significant, she said. I know what it is, I said. A short pause. Her kind, the kind that arrives when she has revised something she was about to say. I wasn't implying otherwise, she said. I looked at her. What were you implying? She held my gaze. Something moved behind her eyes, quick, managed, contained, before it settled into anything I could name. That it matters, she said, to both of us, in ways that are probably not identical. The elevator stopped. My floor. I stepped out, turned back once. She was looking at the doors, not at me. At the doors, the way you look at something when you have decided, at the last moment, not to look at the other thing. I went to my room and stood at the window looking at Paris for a long time. The panel assignments arrived on my phone at 7 the next morning, delivered with the flat neutrality of a device that does not understand what it is conveying. The Emerging Designer Prize Judging Panel. 5 jurors. My name. Ro's name. Ira Brandt. 2 others. Nell had texted from her room. Did you see the panel assignment? I texted back, yes. She texted, how is your blood pressure? I texted back, functional, go to sleep. The judging room was a long conference table in one of the hotel's smaller meeting spaces, tall windows, the particular quiet of a room used for decisions. I arrived early. Ro arrived exactly on time. She was never late, which in her case meant every precise arrival communicated something about the relationship between punctuality and discipline. She sat across the table from me, not beside me, across. I told myself this was better. I was not entirely wrong. The morning was spent on the 8 shortlisted designers. The Emerging Prize had a reputation for identifying people who would be significant in 5 years, which meant the shortlist was a document of suppressed ambitions and early brilliance, the particular tension of work that was still in the process of understanding what it wanted to say. We went through each portfolio methodically, the 5 of us, with the focused assessment of people who had been thinking seriously about this kind of work for long enough that their opinions had texture. Ro was precise and occasionally devastating in the way that only precision can be devastating, not because she was unkind, but because she was right, and being right about work carries its own weight when you are sitting across from someone who can see exactly what you see. She praised a textile designer from Seoul whose work I had privately thought was the strongest entry, and she named specifically what the work was doing rather than what it felt like, which is the difference between a compliment and an assessment. I disagreed with her about the second shortlisted designer. This was genuine, I thought. The work had a formal clarity that the table was undervaluing because it was quieter than the more obviously provocative entries. The quietness was the choice. The absence was load-bearing in the same way the presence was, and reading the absence as a failure of confidence rather than a structural decision missed the entire formal argument the collection was making. I said so. Ro looked at the portfolio again. She did not argue immediately. Walk me through the formal clarity, she said. I did. I talked through the structural choices, the silhouettes in conversation with each other across the looks, the specific restraint that was active rather than passive, the way every element that appeared carried more weight for what had been left out around it, the absence as presence. She listened with the complete, slightly unnerving attention she brought to everything being argued at her, not passive, not neutral, but the particular quality of someone who has trained themselves to hear the case before they respond to it. You're right about the restraint being a choice, she said, when I finished. I'm not certain I was right about the quietness being a problem. Ira Brandt looked between us. Do you two always do this? She asked, not unkindly. Disagree? I said. Come to the same place from opposite ends, Ira said. Ro said, We have a history of being correct about different things. At the same moment, I said, we have a history of arriving late at the same conclusions. We looked at each other across the table, a short silence in the room. The kind that has weight. Sometimes simultaneously, Ro said. Era smiled in the way people smile when they have understood something that has not been said out loud. She turned back to the portfolios with the tact of someone who had learned, in a long professional life, when to let a silence complete itself. The panel broke for lunch at 12:30. The hotel had arranged it in the courtyard garden, one of those Paris hotel gardens that make you feel the city has been keeping a particular secret it is quietly satisfied about. Stone and ivy, and the dense green of plants that had been growing in the same enclosed space for a long time. Round tables, linen, the specific smell of cool stone in midday sun, which has no direct equivalent anywhere that is not very old. I sat with Nell, who had been attending the proceedings as an observer, and who had positioned herself at a courtyard table with the strategic calm of someone who had been managing me for 12 years, and understood that the most useful thing she could do, in a room I was trying to navigate, was make the room feel less like navigation. Sasha Wen sat across from us. Productive morning, Sasha said. She had a notebook on the table she was not writing in. The shortlist is strong, I said. The dynamic was interesting, she said. 5 jurors with different frameworks tend to produce interesting dynamics, I said. Sasha smiled. She had the quality of someone who found precision as entertaining as candor. True. Ro Aldine sat down in the empty chair at our table. I heard her before I saw her. I could place the particular economy of Ro's movements deliberate, nothing wasted in any room I had been in with her for 7 years. She sat down without ceremony, the way people sit who have made a decision and carried it through without revising it on the way. Sasha, she said. Ro. Sasha's attention sharpened by a degree I suspected only I and Ro could detect. I was saying the panel dynamic was interesting. The shortlist is strong, Ro said. Sasha said. Ivy said the same thing. Ro looked at me. I looked at her. We agreed on 6 of the 8, I said. 7, Ro said. You changed my mind on the soul designer. I looked at her. She looked at the menu, which was a single handwritten page of French, and read it with the focused efficiency she brought to everything she read. Sasha Wen was making no notes and recording everything. Lunch was 1 hour. The food was very good, which I registered without tasting it. Sasha asked a general question about the Elara Commission, what the industry hoped the Maison Elara launch would accomplish, what a genuinely new house, rather than a revived one, might mean, and let the question sit in the middle of the table. Ro answered first. She talked about the particular gravity of beginning without an inherited language, no archive to honor or defy, no founding mythology to navigate. No version of success that had already been defined by someone else's hand. The freedom of it, and the specific terror of that freedom, which she named without drama and which was, I thought, the most honest thing she had said in my presence in 3 years. She spoke in the precise, unhurried language she used for everything, but underneath the precision was something I recognized as genuine investment, the particular warmth that enters a voice when the subject is the thing that actually matters, rather than the version of it that impresses rooms. I watched her while she spoke. Sasha Wen looked at me watching. I looked at the garden. Ivy, Sasha said. A new house is a conversation with everything that came before, I said. You don't build in a vacuum. You build in dialogue with the history. Whether you acknowledge it or not, the question is whether you're extending the conversation or arguing with it. And which would Solan Studio do? Sasha asked. I looked at Ro without planning to. She was already looking at me. Argue, I said. Productively. Ro picked up her water glass. Arguing productively requires knowing what you're arguing against. I know what I'm arguing against, I said. A beat. Sasha made a small sound that was not a laugh and filed it somewhere. The afternoon was the formal deliberation process, written assessments, weighting, the procedural structure that turns considered opinion into documented outcome. Ro and I voted identically on 3 of the 4 critical decisions. This was professionally satisfying in the way that agreement between people who have built their identities partly on opposition is always slightly destabilizing. It requires you to revise the narrative of who the other person is, and revision is harder than the original draft. At 4 o'clock we announced the prize, the sole designer. Era Brandt gave both Ro and me a look of calm acknowledgement. The designer was genuinely moved in the way people are moved when they have spent years making work that required faith in its own logic, and someone with authority has named what the logic was. After the announcement, the formal proceedings released into the unstructured hours before dinner, which is where summit events do their most interesting work. The conversations that happen when people have run out of professional framing and are simply, temporarily, persons. I went to the courtyard garden. It was quieter at 5. The afternoon light was doing what Paris afternoon light does, settling heavy and gold over old stone, making the garden into the thing photographers spend careers trying to capture. I had my sketchbook. The formal clarity argument from the morning had opened something in my Alara pitch approach that I had been missing for 8 weeks, a structural principle about restraint that I had been reaching toward without finding the right angle of approach. And now I had it, and I needed to work through it before it closed again. I did not hear her arrive. I looked up and she was there. Ro was standing at the garden entrance with her jacket over her arm, in the specific way of someone who had come somewhere and was now deciding whether the somewhere was right. She looked, in the one unguarded moment before she registered me, genuinely surprised, a real surprise, not the managed version. It lasted less than a second. Then she walked in. "Working?" she asked. "Sketching," I said. "Don't stop on my account." She looked at the garden, at the empty chairs, at the small table between them. She sat down. Not beside me. Across the low table, the same geometry we had maintained all day, the distance of 2 people who are being careful and know it. "The sole designer," she said. "The formal clarity argument. Where did that come from?" I looked up. "Are you workshopping your Alara pitch, or actually asking?" "Genuinely asking," she said. "I can workshop after." I set the sketchbook down. I told her the specific thing I had seen in the collection. The way restraint was a structural principle rather than a stylistic choice. The way the absence of certain things made the things that were present carry weight that would have been distributed and diluted if the absent elements had been included. The negative space as load-bearing. She listened, with the same complete attention she had given it this morning, but here, without the table between us and the formal configuration of the panel, it felt different in a way I did not want to examine directly. "The absence as active presence," she said, when I finished. "Yes. You've been thinking about this for Solin's own direction," she said. "Not just the prize." "Yes," I said. "The archive series was where it started," she said, formally. I looked at her. The Solin archive series, my grandmother's tailoring practice, translated into contemporary silhouettes, had been the most personally demanding work I had done. The collection the industry had responded to most strongly. The collection I had found hardest to talk about publicly because the source material was too close for the kind of aesthetic distance that press conversations tend to want. "You wrote about it," I said, "in the Luster interview." She had said, in 4 lines of a rare extended interview, that it was the most formally honest collection the industry had produced in 2 seasons. "I meant it," she said. "I know," I said. "You don't say things you don't mean." A pause. "That isn't always a compliment," she said. "No," I said, "it isn't." She looked at her hands, a barely visible motion. She pressed her thumb against the knuckle of her index finger once and released it. In 18 months of working for her, I had catalogued her tells before I understood what I was doing. That one appeared when she was deciding between the version she was going to say and the one she had already decided against. "How long since you were last in Paris?" she asked, the version she had decided on. 2 years. "The Textile Council in Milan was the last time I saw you, but I came through Paris in the spring the year before that." "You stay longer now?" "When I can justify it." She nodded. The garden held its particular stillness. Above us, through the hotel walls, someone was playing piano quiet. A few floors up, the sound filtered down through stone and wood and time. "The essay?" she said. I went very still. You know which one? She said. I did. The essay I had published 7 years ago, the piece on formalism and conservatism in luxury design, that everyone in the industry had understood to be about Aldine without my having named it directly. I had been 24 years old. I had left her studio 6 months before I published it. I had been full of something I could not name clearly then, and refused to name clearly now: frustration. The particular grief of having spent 18 months learning from someone extraordinary, and then having to leave the radius of that and build something alone, from nothing, in a city that was not interested in patience. The essay had come out as argument, as the only language I could find for what I actually felt. I was 24, I said. I know how old you were, she said. Then, you know, the argument was right, she said. I stopped. Formally, she continued, the conservatism you named was real. I had been protecting a version of Aldine's aesthetic because it was what had worked, and the working had made me cautious in ways I had not examined. The essay made me examine them. I had been carrying the essay between us for 7 years like a debt, a thing I had done that required either defense or apology. And I had chosen defense because defense was available, and apology required a vocabulary I had not developed then and had not needed to use since. Your response, I said. 4 words. She looked at me directly. Good instincts. Early days. You knew what you were doing, I said. Yes, she said. It launched me, I said. You knew it would. Yes, she said. I held her gaze. Why? The longest pause she had offered all day. A piano note resolved somewhere in the building above us, and the garden was very quiet. Because the instincts were good, she said. And the argument was right, and the fact that it was written about me did not change either of those things. That is an enormous amount of— I stopped, started again. That is a very large thing to absorb in someone who had just quit your studio and published a critique of your work. It was accurate, she said. Accurate things require absorbing regardless of their source. Something at the corner of her mouth 1 millimeter. The thing that lived there when she found the situation either dry or illuminating, and could not be entirely certain which. I still believe the instincts are good, she said. The light had shifted from gold to something cooler, the specific transition of Paris evenings that makes time a physical thing. I should have gone upstairs. I should have worked on the pitch. I sat in the stone garden with the piano resolving above us, and thought about 7 years of carrying something as a debt that she had read, from the beginning, as neither debt nor damage. I should change for dinner, she said. Yes, I said. She stood, picked up her jacket, looked at me once, the kind of look that catalogues without commenting. The formal clarity argument, she said. You were right, about the soul designer. I know, I said. I know you know, she said. And she was gone. I sat in the garden for another 20 minutes, with the sketchbook open in my lap, looking at the old stone, thinking about the word right, and the 7 years I had spent carrying the essay as something that lived between us and the specific, disordering quality of learning that she had never read it that way at all. Dinner was at 8 in the hotel's formal dining room, the full 40 summit attendees, long tables, the particular choreography of events where conversation is simultaneously performance and genuine pleasure in ratios that shift as the evening goes on. I sat between Nell and Ara Brandt. Ro was at the far end of the table. I did not track her for the first 20 minutes. Then Nell leaned over and said, very quietly, She has looked at you 4 times in the last 10 minutes. You're counting, I said. Once when you laughed at something, Ara said. Once when you picked up your glass. Once when you leaned forward. And just now. I picked up my wine and took a deliberate sip. What do you want me to do with that information? I asked. I want you, Nell said, to stop pretending you don't have the same information about her in reverse. I want you to acknowledge, privately and just to me, that whatever you have been managing for 7 years is a thing that has a name, and that this week is going to cost you something real if you don't decide in advance what you're willing to pay. I asked Ara a question about the Copenhagen institution's most recent acquisitions. Ara answered with the gracious thoroughness of someone who genuinely loved the subject. Nell let me redirect. She was, as always, gracious about letting things go, which was one of her best qualities and occasionally her most provoking one. Dinner ended at 11. The evening dissolved into smaller clusters, the hotel bar, the natural gravity toward rooms and rest. I said goodnight to Cecile Maret, to Sasha Wen, to Era. I went upstairs. My room was on the 11th floor. I stood at the window and looked at Paris the Sacré-Cœur, lit white in the distance, the grid of streets below still lit and moving, the orange density of a city that has been continuously occupied for long enough that it has stopped remembering how to be still. I worked on the pitch until 1 in the morning. The formal clarity idea, the sole designer's restraint, the absence as active presence, had unlocked the structural principle I had been reaching for since I began developing the pitch 8 weeks ago. I worked through it in the sketchbook first, then on the tablet, the way I had done since I was 17 in my grandmother's tailoring room, trying to understand what her hands were doing and why it mattered. At 1:30, I closed the tablet. I was not tired. I was the kind of awake that comes when your mind has found a thread it cannot release, and no amount of stillness changes that. The pitch was right. I could feel it was right, the way you feel things you have been working toward for months when they finally arrive, not with relief, exactly, but with the specific quiet of something that has settled into its correct position. I went to the rooftop. Nell had found the access on the first evening, a door at the end of the 14th floor corridor, unmarked, opening onto a stone terrace that was technically available to guests, and practically used by no one at this hour, because the small hours at a fashion summit meant either still awake over wine at the bar or unconscious behind a weighted duvet. The terrace was wide, stone-paved, a glass railing running the length of its open edge. There were chairs, a low table. The cold of November in Paris at 3 in the morning, the kind that arrives inside your clothes immediately and makes you very aware of the exact volume of your own body. No lights on the terrace except the city itself, orange and white and constant, the way city light is constant, illuminating without quite landing anywhere. I walked to the rail. I had been there for 2 minutes, maybe 3, when I heard the door. I did not turn around immediately. A night shift staff member, someone from a different floor who also could not sleep. Anyone, really. Then, I heard the footsteps. The particular economy of them deliberate, nothing wasted, the pace of someone who has made a decision and is moving toward it without revision. She stopped beside me at the rail, close enough that I could see her without turning fully. Dark trousers, a cream sweater, hair down, and that last detail registered before I could stop it from registering, because I had seen her hair down twice in 7 years, and both times it had felt significant in a way I had never been able to make generic. She was holding a glass of something amber. "You came up here too," she said. "Apparently," I said. Silence. The city below. The particular soundscape of Paris at 3 in the morning, which is never truly silent traffic at the edges, a voice somewhere, the hum of a city too occupied with its own continuity to stop for the small hours. "The pitch?" she asked. "The pitch?" I said. We stood for a long time without speaking. Long enough that the silence crossed out of awkward territory into something else, the kind of quiet that only happens between people who have, at some point, been comfortable in each other's presence, and who find that the comfort has not entirely gone away, despite everything that came after. The cold was doing something useful to the air, making it sharp, making everything at the edges of vision very clear. Paris below was orange and endless. "I worked at Aldine for 18 months, I said. "I know," she said. "You told me in the first week that my construction sense was good, but my concept development was overwrought." "It was overwrought," she said. "You were 23. "You were right," I said. "I spent 2 years after I left correcting it. The archive series was the first collection where I thought I had." She turned her head to look at me. I kept my eyes on the city. "I know," she said. "You wrote 4 lines about it," I said. "I meant all 4, she said. "Then why didn't you say it directly?" I asked. "Not the interview. To me. You had my contact from when I worked for you. It would have taken a single message." The longest pause she had given me across 4 days. Paris below us. The cold. The glass rail catching the light from the city in a way that made it look like it was lit from inside. "Because direct contact would have been harder to justify as professional," she said. I turned and looked at her. She was already looking at me. In the city light, In the specific illumination of Paris at 3 in the morning, Ro Aldine's face was doing something I had not seen it do in any room in 7 years. It was not composed in the way it was composed in rooms. The composure was there, but it was working, visibly working, the way it works when the thing underneath it is larger than the structure built to contain it. "What does that mean?" I asked. She held my gaze for a long time. The glass in her hand was very still. "It means," she said, and her voice was careful in a way that was not distance but its opposite, the carefulness of someone for whom each word costs something right now and who is choosing to pay anyway, that I did not trust myself to make direct contact and call it professional. The city was very loud. Or very quiet. I was not certain which. "Ro," I said. "Don't," she said, quietly. Not sharply, quietly, which was different and more difficult. "Don't say anything yet. We have a pitch in 6 hours, both of us, for the same commission. We are competitors for something that matters more than most things either of us will do this decade." "I know that," I said. "Then, she said, "why I can't say the rest of it tonight." I looked at her. This woman who had given me my first real professional education and then said 4 words to a trade journal that launched me and had been careful, precisely and deliberately, to maintain a distance between us for 7 years, a distance that had just admitted, on a Paris rooftop at 3 in the morning, with the city burning below us, that it was not purely professional. "You came up here," I said. "So did you," she said. "I came because I couldn't sleep," I said. "Why did you come up?" She held my gaze. "The same reason," she said. And then, "And because there's a view." The corner of her mouth. 1 millimeter. I turned back to the city. She turned back to the city. We stood at the glass rail with Paris below us and 6 hours between us and the rest of it, and the cold settled around us both like something deliberate, and the orange light made it impossible to look away. "I'm going to win the commission," I said. "I know you're going to try," she said. "So are you," I said. "Yes," she said. "Then tomorrow we're competitors," I said. "Yes," she said. "And tonight?" I asked. She looked at the city for a long time. "Tonight," she said carefully, "we are 2 people on a rooftop." I did not answer. I did not have to. The cold had gotten into my hands, and I stood there anyway. Ro stood beside me anyway. Paris did what Paris always does, which is make the present moment feel both significant and exactly the correct size for what it contains. I stayed until 4. When I finally went inside and let the door close behind me, she was still at the rail, in the cream sweater and the dark trousers with the city behind her and the glass in her hand, looking at something that was not the skyline. I did not sleep. The room was the same color it had been when I left the rooftop. Paris, at 4 in the morning, has a specific gray, not dark, not light, not the orange of the lit streets but the sky above them, beginning very slowly to remember what it is supposed to do. I stood at my window and watched it and did not pretend I was going to sleep. The pitch was in 5 hours. I had a folder on the desk with printed reference images and handwritten notes and 3 pages of formal language I had revised twice in the last 4 days. The argument was sound. The formal clarity principle, the absence as active presence, the restraint that makes the things included carry more weight, was the right organizing idea for a house that had never existed before, and therefore had no inherited limitations to negotiate around. I had been building toward this pitch for 8 weeks, and in the last 4 days, in a Paris hotel garden, the final piece of it had arrived. The fact that it had arrived in conversation with Ro Aldine was something I was going to put in its correct folder and not examine until after the presentation. I made tea from the room's kettle and sat in the chair by the window and let the gray outside get lighter by degrees. The way things get lighter when they are not being watched directly. The city below was quieter than it would be in 2 hours. The specific quality of Paris at 5 in the morning, still moving, never quite still, but slower. The traffic a distant sound rather than an ambient one, the particular low hum of a city between shifts. At 6 I showered, at 6:30 I dressed. At 7 I looked at the folder once more and did not revise anything. At 7:15 my phone buzzed. "Nell, are you awake?" I wrote back, "Yes." She wrote, "How long?" I wrote, "Don't ask that." She wrote, Eat something before you present, not the pastry basket. Real food. I'll meet you at 8 in the restaurant. Nell was already at the corner table when I arrived, with coffee and something from the kitchen she had apparently ordered in advance, because she knew I would not order correctly for myself before a presentation. She looked at me across the table with the eyes she reserved for situations where she had both information and the wisdom to deliver only part of it. "How are you?" she asked. "Good," I said. "The pitch is right." "I know the pitch is right," she said. "That's not what I asked." I drank the coffee. It was very good. Paris understood coffee the way Paris understood old stone and good light as a material to be taken seriously. "I was on the rooftop last night," I said. Nell set down her cup. She did not say anything. "She was already there," I said. "Of course she was," Nell said, in the tone of someone for whom this was the least surprising sentence of the morning. "She said she didn't trust herself to make direct contact and call it professional," I said. 7 years of not sending a single message, and that was the reason. Nell was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around us, a few other early risers, a waiter folding napkins at a station near the window, the smell of bread from somewhere deeper in the kitchen. "What did you say?" Nell asked. "Nothing," I said. "She said we had a pitch in 6 hours, and she couldn't say the rest of it." Nell nodded slowly. She had the specific patience of someone who had watched me navigate complicated things for 12 years and had learned that the most useful intervention was usually to make sure I ate before doing so. "What is the rest of it?" she asked. I looked at the table. "Everything that comes after 7 years of choosing the closest available container," I said. Nell said nothing for a moment. Then she pushed the plate toward me and said, "Eat. You can figure out the rest after you win the commission." The Alara committee presentations were held in a private meeting room on the 3rd floor, separate from the summit spaces, with its own entrance and a quality of deliberate neutrality that rooms used for significant decisions tend to have. The sessions were staggered by an hour, and the committee had not disclosed the presentation order in advance, which was either a neutral logistical choice or Cécile Moret's version of a controlled variable. The order was alphabetical. Aldine before Salon. I found this out from Braun Halcott. Braun was Rose's business partner, the operational counterpart to Rose's creative authority, the person who made Aldine function as a company rather than only as a vision. She was 42 and had the particular energy of someone who had been managing the practical dimensions of a creative enterprise for long enough that she had opinions about everything and shared them selectively. She was waiting in the lobby outside the meeting room at 9 when I arrived, which meant Ro was already inside. "Solon," she said. She had the voice of someone who had conducted negotiations in 12 different languages and knew which register to use. "Halcott," I said. We stood in the lobby, in the specific configuration of 2 people who were professional acquaintances and present adversaries, and knew it, and had both decided to be gracious about it. "Alphabetical order," she said. "Rose in now." "I assumed," I said. Braun looked at the closed door. Something moved across her face, not concern exactly, but the particular alertness of someone who has invested heavily in an outcome and is watching it proceed beyond the point where they can influence it. "She worked on this pitch for 6 weeks, Braun said. "I worked on mine for 8, I said. Braun glanced at me. "One of those assessments that takes less than a second and registers everything." "I know," she said. "I've seen the Solon studio work, the archive series." She paused. "The formal clarity argument in that collection is very strong." I looked at her. She was looking at the closed door again, not at me, with an expression I could not fully read, but which had something careful in it. Not warning, not concession, something more precise than either. "The committee has good eyes," she said, and that was all. She moved toward the chairs along the near wall and sat down with the stillness of someone who had done a great deal of waiting in her professional life and had learned to be economical about it. I stood in the lobby and thought about what she had not said. Rose's session was 1 hour. At 10 o'clock, the door opened. Ro came out. She was in the charcoal suit she wore for significant professional occasions. I had seen it twice before at industry events, and the sight of it had always communicated something about how seriously she was taking the room she was walking into. Her hair was pinned. Her face was the composed version, the public version, the one she wore when the performance was still required. She saw me. A very brief pause, one step slightly shortened before she continued toward Braun. Her chin lifted once in my direction, a fraction. Not acknowledgement, and not greeting, and not distance. Something that did not have a name in professional language. Then she was past me. I heard her say something low to Braun, not words I could catch, but the tone of it, which was controlled and careful, in the way things are controlled and careful when you are standing in a corridor and have just finished something that cost you. I went into the presentation room. Cecile Maret was at the head of the table with 4 other committee members, all senior figures from different sectors of Alara's existing business, all of them with the particular attentiveness of people who had heard a great many presentations and had learned to sit inside them differently from how they had at the beginning of their careers. Cecile had the quiet authority she brought to every room I had been in with her. She gestured toward the presenter's position and said, simply, "Whenever you're ready." I was ready. I presented for 52 minutes. I spoke about the formal clarity principle in terms that were specific and grounded and honest about what a founding philosophy of restraint would mean for a house that was beginning without an archive, about the particular power of the absence as load-bearing structure when applied to the language of luxury, about the specific choices in silhouette and material and visual identity that followed from that principle with the same logical necessity that structural decisions follow from architectural philosophy. I showed the sketchbook work. I showed the formal language I had built from it. I showed what Maison Alara's first collection could look like if the restraint was not a stylistic choice, but a founding one, not a house that chose not to do certain things, but a house that understood what the choice of not doing made possible. Cecile asked 4 questions. All 4 were the questions of someone who had been thinking about the same problem from a different angle and wanted to see whether the angles resolved. They resolved. At 11:15, I thanked the committee and walked out of the room. Nell was in the lobby. She looked at my face. "Good?" she said. "Yes," I said. "How good?" "The best I've built," I said. She nodded. Not celebratory, we were not at the point for celebration, but with the specific calm of someone who had been watching me work toward something for a long time and recognized the face of someone who had done it correctly. We went to lunch. We talked about Paris and the summit and the prize announcement and various things that were not the pitch and not Roaldine, and I was grateful for both of those absences in the conversation. The committee would deliberate through the afternoon and into the evening. Cecile had said the decision would be communicated individually before the final reception at 8, which meant the reception itself would be either a celebration or a professional courtesy, depending on which direction the decision went. And either way, you attended, because that was how the industry operated. The afternoon was long. I went back to my room. I worked on nothing. I looked at Paris and thought about the pitch and thought about the specific quality of the rooftop at 4 in the morning and the way the city light had been catching the glass rail and about Rose standing beside me with her hair down and a glass of something amber saying, "The same reason." And because there's a view, the corner of her mouth. 1 millimeter. I closed the curtains and lay down on top of the bed and did not sleep, and did not pretend to sleep, which was at least honest. At 6:30, my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. When I answered, it was Cecile Maret's assistant, asking if I was available to speak with Cecile at 7. I said yes. I was standing at the window again when the knock came at my door at 7 o'clock. Cecile was not the type to send someone to deliver significant news. She came herself, in the efficient charcoal of her professional uniform, and she looked at me with those clear, assessing eyes that had been doing the same work for 30 years. "May I come in?" she said. "Please," I said. She sat in the chair by the desk. I sat across from her. Outside, Paris was making its early evening sounds, the particular acoustic of the city between the afternoon and the night, the shift audible in the quality of noise from the streets below. "The committee has reached a decision," she said. "I wanted to speak with you before the reception this evening." I looked at her. "The Maison Alara commission," she said, "has been offered to Salon Studio." The room was very still. I was very still in it. "The committee was unanimous," she said. "The formal clarity principle you presented today is the founding language we were looking for. It is both original and grounded, and it asks the right questions about what a new house should know before it decides what it wants to say. I said, "Thank you." Cecile looked at me for a moment. She had the quality, I thought, of someone who had given a great deal of significant news in her professional life, and understood that the appropriate response was to let it arrive without filling the space around it. "There is one other thing," she said. "In the interest of full transparency." She paused. "Miss Aldine's presentation this morning cited your archive series as a formal reference, not a competing work as a foundational formal touchstone for the language she was proposing. The committee found this unusual. I found it clarifying." She looked at me with those steady eyes. "I thought you should know." I held her gaze. "I didn't know," I said. "No," she said. "I assumed not." She stood. She extended her hand, and I shook it. And she said that Alara's legal team would be in contact the following week, and that she hoped I enjoyed the reception, and she left. I sat alone in the room for a long time. Roe had cited the archive series. In her pitch. In the presentation that was determining whether she won the commission she had spent 6 weeks building. She had named my work not as competition, not as a counter-argument, but as a formal source, a touchstone, in the room where the decision was being made. It could have cost her the commission, it probably had, and she had done it anyway. I thought about Braun Halcott in the lobby, with her careful expression and the things she had not said. I know. The formal clarity argument in that collection is very strong. The reception was at 8. I arrived at 5 past. The room was the hotel's largest space, the main reception hall, chandeliers, the particular warm amber light that makes formal spaces feel like the conclusion of something rather than its beginning. 40 people in their summit final best, the ambient noise of an industry event winding toward its close, the knowledge in the room that the commission had been decided, and that someone in this space knew the answer, and someone else in this space was about to. I moved through the room with the practiced composure that had taken me years to develop and used it now, the way you use things you have earned as a tool, not a performance. I saw Roe at the edge of the room. She was with Braun and Era Brandt and a man from the Alara communications team I had been introduced to on day 1, and whose name I had not retained. She was holding a glass and listening to something Era was saying. She looked, to someone who did not know her, exactly as she always looked, composed, present, the most controlled person in whatever portion of the room she occupied. To me, she looked like someone containing a significant amount of information in a container that was managing it carefully. Our eyes met across the room. She held the look for 1 second, one full breath, and looked back at Era. Sasha Wen materialized beside me with the mild, unhurried quality she had maintained across the entire summit. "Congratulations," she said. I looked at her. "Worse travels," she said, not quite apologetically. Cecile mentioned it to the committee liaison at 6:30. The liaison mentioned it to 3 people. "You know how it goes." "I do," I said. Sasha held her glass. She was looking at the room with the specific attention of someone who had been filing things all week and had nearly everything she needed. "She cited your archive series," Sasha said. "I know," I said. "I asked her about it this afternoon," Sasha said. "After the sessions. I was curious what she'd say." I looked at her. She said, "The work earned it." Sasha's expression was mild and precise. That was all she said, 4 words. "Which you will recognize as a number she has used before." I was quiet. Sasha set her glass down on a passing tray. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has understood the full shape of a story and found it satisfying. "I have a piece to file," she said. "And I believe you have somewhere better to be." She moved away through the room with the particular grace of someone who had delivered exactly what was required and was done requiring anything in return. I stood for a moment at the edge of the reception, with the amber light and the 40-person current of the industry's finest evening performance moving around me, and then I set down my glass and walked toward Roe. She saw me coming. She did not step back or forward. She held her position with the stillness she brought to everything, and she said something brief and polite to Era Brandt, and by the time I reached her, there was enough space in their cluster for the conversation to be the one I needed it to be. "Congratulations," she said. You cited the archive series, I said. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise, she had been expecting this. But the shift of someone who had prepared for a thing and finds, when it arrives, that the preparation was insufficient. Yes, she said. In your pitch, I said. In the presentation that was determining whether you won the commission. Yes, she said. Come outside, I said. She looked at me for one moment. Then she set down her glass and followed me. The courtyard garden was quiet at this hour. The reception had pulled everyone indoors and the cold had finished the job. The stone was very still. The same dense ivy, the same old walls, the same ambient city sound filtering over them. The chairs at the low table where we had sat 2 days ago were empty. The lamp at the garden entrance threw a warm circle onto the path and not much further. We stood in the garden, and I looked at her and said, "Walk me through the reasoning." She looked at the garden wall, then at me. "The formal clarity principle is yours," she said. "I have known it was yours since before you had language for it. Since you were 23 and arguing about construction principles in the studio in a way that was overwrought but not wrong." A pause. I could not present a founding vision for a new house and pretend I had arrived at its formal language without reference to the work that had been doing the same thing for 7 years. That would have been dishonest. "It could have cost you the commission," I said. "Yes," she said. "Did you know that?" "Yes." I looked at her. "Why?" She held my gaze. The garden was very quiet. The cold was in the stone and the ivy and the air between us, and she was standing in it in the charcoal suit, with the composed face and the composure that was, as it had been for 4 days, working harder than usual. "Because I have been using professional language to avoid an honest one for 7 years, she said, "and the pitch was the last room I had left where I could make a choice about it. And I chose the honest version." She paused. "Even if the honest version cost me the commission, which it appears to have done, the formal clarity argument is also what won me the commission," I said. "I know," she said. "The argument is right. It was always going to win the right room." I looked at her for a long time. The garden lamp was doing something useful to the space between us, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the warm, ordinary light of a place that had been used for honest conversation before, and was prepared to be used for one again. "Say the rest of it," I said. She looked at me. "The rest that you couldn't say on the rooftop," I said. "You said you couldn't say it because we had 6 hours until the pitch. The pitch is done. The commission is decided. Say the rest of it." A silence. Not the managed kind. The kind that comes before something costs something. "I fell in love with you," she said, "when you were 23 years old and too angry about everything to know it. Working in my studio for 18 months with your overwrought concept development and your very correct argument about construction principles and your specific, infuriating habit of being right about things and furious that being right required so much work." She stopped. The corner of her mouth, 1 millimeter, and then it was gone. "I fell in love with you, and I decided that the most honest thing I could do was let you go and become who you were becoming, without me complicating the radius of it. That was not your decision to make," I said. "I know," she said. "You decided what was honest for me," I said, without asking me. "Yes," she said. "And the essay," I said. 4 words in a trade journal instead of a conversation. The Luster interview instead of a message. 7 years of professional language instead of the other kind. "Yes," she said. "That is an enormous amount of deciding things on my behalf," I said. "I know," she said. The word again. Always the word again. The shortest sentence she ever made carried the most weight. "I know exactly what it is. I'm not asking you to minimize it. I'm asking you to hear that I know." I looked at her. This woman who had given me my first real professional education and then said 4 words to a trade journal that launched me into the conversation I had spent 7 years inhabiting. Who had named my work in a room where naming it cost her something visible and real. Who was standing in a Paris garden at 10 in the evening in a charcoal suit, with her hair still pinned and her composure barely holding the edges, saying, "I know, I know, I know," not as deflection, not as performance, but as the only accurate accounting available. "What do you want?" I asked. She looked at me. The composure held, and underneath the composure, something held too, not grief, not relief, something more complicated than either. The specific quality of someone who has stopped making decisions for the other person and is waiting, genuinely, to hear what the other person says. To stop using the available containers, she said. To stop choosing the professional version because it is the only version I trust myself to say. To find the other language and use it. A pause. I want time to learn how to do that. And I want, if you're willing to learn it in proximity to you, rather than across 7 years of managed distance. I looked at her for a long time. That is the most structurally precise declaration of intent I have ever heard, I said. The corner of her mouth. 1 millimeter. Then more further than 1 millimeter. Further than it usually went. The thing that lived in that territory when she found something genuinely illuminating rather than just dry. I know, she said, and this time there was something different in it. The smallest thread of warmth underneath the precision. You are going to stop making decisions about what is honest for me, I said. Yes, she said. When you know something, you are going to say it directly. Not to a trade journal, not to an interviewer. To me. Yes, she said. And when you find the other language, I said, you are going to use it even if it costs you something, even if the room you are in is a room with significant consequences. She held my gaze. I already have, she said. Today, in that room. I looked at her. The garden was still. The old walls held the lamplight. The city was over the walls, and around us, and underneath us. That permanent orange burn, and we were in the specific still space of a walled garden in Paris, at 10 in the evening, with everything that had needed to be said having now been said. I reached across the small space between us, and I found her hand. Not dramatically. Not frantic. The master prompt of every conversation we had ever had was restraint, and the restraint had not disappeared, it had simply become something honest, instead of something managed. My hand found hers at the edge of the garden table, and she went very still for 1 second. The held breath second of someone receiving something they have been refusing to reach for, and then her hand turned under mine and held on. We stood at the stone table in the garden, with the cold around us and her hand in mine, and neither of us said anything for a long time. The piano was playing again somewhere in the hotel above us, 3 floors up, the same sound that had filtered down through the stone when we were sitting here 2 evenings ago. Warm, distant, not trying to be anything other than itself. The commission, she said, finally. Yes, I said. You'll be building something from the beginning, she said. No archive to argue with, no inherited language. A pause. The formal clarity principle as a founding philosophy for something that has never existed before. Yes, I said. That's the right assignment for it, she said. I looked at her sideways. Are you going to spend the next 3 years critiquing my collection choices from a professional distance? No, she said. And then, I am going to think about them at length and tell you directly. Good, I said. Nell came through the garden entrance at 10:15, saw us at the table, and stopped. She had the expression of someone who has spent 4 days being extremely patient about exactly this outcome, and is now very carefully not making it about herself. The reception is winding up, she said, addressing the general middle distance between us. Thank you, Nell, I said. Nell looked at Ro. Halcott is looking for you, she said. She says she has the car for the airport and you have a 9:15 flight. Ro looked at me. Tonight, I said. Tomorrow morning would have been the alternative, she said. I chose the one that required less deciding. I thought about this. You booked a 9:15 flight because staying an extra night was a decision you didn't trust yourself to make correctly. Yes, she said. That is extremely you, I said. I know, she said. I looked at her hand in mine. I looked at Paris, which was doing what Paris always does to the top of old walls, that permanent orange burn, the light that never really goes away. Go catch your flight, I said. Call me when you land. She looked at me. Directly, she said. Directly, I said. She stood. She picked up her jacket from the chair back where she had set it when we came outside. She looked at me with those clear, precise eyes that had been cataloging things for 35 years, and had been cataloging me specifically for 7 of them. The archive series, she said. The formal clarity principle. The absence as active presence. She held my gaze. I cited it because it deserved to be cited. But I also cited it because I have been paying the specific quality of attention to your work that you pay to things you cannot afford to lose. I wanted there to be a room where I had said that honestly, regardless of what the room cost me. The garden was very still. That is the other language, I said. Yes, she said. Keep using it, I said. She nodded once. Then she walked toward the garden entrance and stopped when she reached the lamp. She turned back. Ivy, she said. She used my name the way she had always used it, precisely, specifically, like it was a piece of information she had already accounted for and found, in the accounting, to be accurate. But this time the precision had something else inside it, something that had been underneath the precision all along, and had now, in a Paris garden at 10:15 in the evening, been given the space to be what it actually was. The instincts were always good, she said, from the beginning. I looked at her. I know, I said. The corner of her mouth, further than 1 millimeter, further than it usually went. She left. I sat in the garden for a long time after she had gone. The lamp, the old stone, the ivy, and the cold. The piano from somewhere above. Nell sat down in the chair Ro had left empty and did not say anything for a few minutes, which was one of the things I valued most about her. Well, Nell said, eventually. Yes, I said. The commission, she said. Yes. And the other thing? Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She had the expression of someone who has been managing someone else's most complicated situation for 4 days on very little sleep, and has decided that the expression of deep satisfaction she is currently feeling is best kept to herself. You should sleep, she said. I know, I said. Actually sleep, she said. Not the rooftop, not the window, actual horizontal sleep. I'll try, I said. Nell stood. She looked at me with the warm, grounded attention she had brought to 12 years of my most complicated moments. She cited your work in the pitch that would have won her the commission, she said. That's not nothing. No, I said. It's not. She went inside. I stayed in the garden until the cold became a practical concern rather than a metaphorical one, which in Paris in November does not take long. Then I went upstairs, and I lay down on the hotel bed, and I closed my eyes, and I slept. The flight from Paris to the city I worked in was 2.5 hours. Ro called when she landed. It was 11:40 at night, Paris time, which meant she had barely made the 9:15. I answered on the second ring. You made the flight, I said. I made the flight, she said. Her voice had the specific quality of airports at night, a particular acoustic, slightly hollow, the sound of a large space that has been running all day and is now at its quietest. How is it? I said. Cold, she said. Later than it looks from the departure board. Airports are always later than they look, I said. A pause, not the managed kind. Thank you, she said, for asking me to say it. Thank you, I said, for saying it in the room that cost you. A longer pause. The airport acoustic. I'm going to find the other language, she said. It may take time. I have time, I said. I know, she said. And then, I'll call you next week. Directly, I said. Directly, she said. She called on a Tuesday. We talked for an hour about the Elara contracts and the Solon Studios' capacity for the scope of work and the specific formal challenge of a founding collection with no archive to argue against. And then for another 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of that. And she said all of it with the directness she had promised in the garden, in the language that was not the professional one, which was new and slightly uncomfortable for both of us in the specific way that honest things are uncomfortable before they become fluent. The Maison Elara announcement was made in December. My name, in the press language, as founding creative director. The industry responded in the way the industry responds to significant commissions. A wave of coverage, opinion, the collective processing of what the choice meant. One review in Luster magazine, published 3 weeks after the announcement, discussed the formal clarity principle in terms that were so specific about the archive series as its conceptual origin that I read it 3 times to be sure I was understanding it correctly. Sasha Wen's byline was at the top. The piece ended with a short paragraph about the particular power of formal honesty, the willingness to name your sources, including the ones that cost you something to name. I texted the piece to Ro. She texted back, after an hour. The luster piece is accurate. I wrote, Sasha Wen pays attention. She wrote, yes. Then, so do I. Then, after a pause, I wanted you to know that. I looked at my phone for a moment, in the quiet of my studio, with the sketchbook open on the desk and the first Maison Elara collection sketches fanned out across it, the beginning of something that had never existed before, built on the principle of what the absence makes possible. I wrote, I know you do. I have known since I was 23. She did not write back for several minutes. Then, that is the most accurate and inconvenient thing you have ever said to me. I smiled. I wrote, get used to it. She wrote, I am attempting to. The first time she came to the studio was in January. Not planned as a visit, she was in the city for a meeting with a materials supplier 2 streets away, and she texted at noon to say she was nearby if I had 20 minutes. I wrote back, I have more than 20 minutes. She came in from the January cold with her coat still buttoned and her hair pinned, and the particular quiet economy of a woman who moved through spaces without asking them to accommodate her, and she stood at the entrance to my workspace and looked at the Maison Elara sketches fanned across the desk, and the sketchbook open at the formal clarity work, and the reference images pinned to the board above. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at it the way she looked at everything she cared about completely, without the filler responses that most people use to signal engagement. The absence as active presence, she said. Yes, I said. The third silhouette, she said. The proportion at the shoulder. Still working on it, I said. May I? She said, and gestured toward the sketchbook. Yes, I said. She crossed the room and picked up the sketchbook and stood at the desk looking at the third silhouette with the specific attention of someone for whom the formal problem was genuinely interesting. She studied it for a long time. She set the book back down and looked at the reference images on the board. The load-bearing negative space is working in the first 2 silhouettes, she said. The third is asking the absence to carry too much. Reduce what's present at the shoulder by a third, and let the restraint do the work the detail is currently trying to do. I looked at the sketch. She was right. I know, I said. I know you know, she said. I looked up at her. The corner of her mouth was at the further than 1 millimeter position, the one that was a genuine smile in the specific register Ro Aldine used for genuine smiles, which was different from anyone else's, and required, if you had been paying attention, no additional evidence. I crossed the room to where she was standing at the desk. The proximity was the same kind it had been in the elevator and in the garden, and on the rooftop close enough that everything at the edges of both of us became very aware of everything at the edges of the other, but the quality of it was different, not managed. Not the distance of 2 people who are being careful. Just the specific, ordinary nearness of 2 people who have found their way to the same side of the thing they have been circling for 7 years. I touched her jaw first, the warmth of her skin under my hand, and the slight catch of her breath, and the way she went very still, in the particular manner of someone receiving something they have been refusing to reach for, and then her hand came up and covered mine, not pulling away but holding it there, her palm over the back of my hand, her fingers closing. Then I kissed her. It was not frantic. It was not desperate. It was the kind of kiss that happens when the restraint finally becomes something honest, instead of something managed, patient, specific, unhurried, the full weight of 7 years of choosing the available container finally released into something it could actually hold. She kissed me back the same way. Her hand at my jaw, her other hand finding my waist and settling there the way you settle into something that you recognize. The sketchbook was on the desk behind her. The Maison Elara silhouettes fanned across the surface, the board above with the reference images pinned in rows. January cold outside the studio windows, the city gray and ordinary and ongoing. When we separated, she looked at me. The third silhouette, she said. Yes, I said. I'll reduce the shoulder. By a third, she said. By a third, I agreed. She looked at the sketchbook again. Then at me. I have a 2 o'clock, she said. I know, I said. She picked up her coat, which she had never taken off. She looked at me with those clear eyes that had been paying the specific quality of attention to my work and my face, and the things I said, and the things I did not say for 7 years. And she looked at me now, without any container around the looking at all. I'll call you, she said. Directly, I said. Directly, she said. She went to the studio door and opened it. Outside, the January street was gray and cold, and the city was doing what the city always does. She stopped in the doorway and looked back once, the same motion she had made in the elevator corridor, when she had turned to look at a door instead of me, and this time she did not look at the door. The instincts, she said. Still good. Still improving, I said. The corner of her mouth. All the way now. Both sides. The full version of the thing that had lived in that 1 millimeter for 7 years. She went out into January. I stood in the studio with my hand still warm from her jaw, and the third silhouette on the desk, and the entire formal project of a house that had never existed before waiting for me on a sketchbook. And I thought about what it means to build something from the beginning, with no archive to argue against, and no inherited limitations to negotiate. On the principle of what the absence makes possible, I thought about 7 years of choosing the available container. About the essay that came out as argument, because argument was the only language I had for it. About 4 words in a trade journal that were, I understood now, the most direct thing she had been able to say at the time, and had meant every syllable of. About a rooftop in Paris at 3 in the morning and a glass of something amber, and the city below us, burning. I reduced the shoulder by a third. She was right. The restraint did the work. It was, in every way that has ever mattered, exactly enough.